Hello, and thank you for joining me on Colin's Eclectic channel. So today we're moving away from the last few videos which featured Doctor Who stories to look at this range of well, little booklets really. It's not quite right to call them comics, but they are in a sense an overlapping genre. The Commando series, there were a few ranges of booklets like this, and they were sort of aimed at a crossover range of children and adults who are mainly interested in stories featuring the Second World War, if these things are anything to go by. So I've got here a range of from across the 70s. First 1971, 72, 73, 74, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 79. Things we might note about this. First of all, this had been running since about 1961, and here in around about April 1971, April 1971, we have the first edition, or very close to the first, in decimal coinage. So we're no longer talking of pounds, shillings and sixpence. We have the new decimalised currency on the front, and this says 5p. And price inflation for children's comics in the 70s was pretty slow. So over the years got 5p, 6p all the way till 74, 75 when it hits 7p. And by 79 it's hit 10p, but it's only in the 1980s that price inflation really took off for children's comics, and I think within a couple of years of this it was up to 18 pence, and it goes up and up. So it began in 1961, still running today, which I think is a remarkable achievement, and still I think has tens of thousands of readers. Not as much as in the early days, but there you go. Now, as a child, I didn't so much read these ones. I preferred the larger format comics. So, for example, in the mid-70s, this was launched in the UK, 5p for Warlord comic. And with these large format ones, I'll just bring a little shelf in so we can see. I'm going to show you the difference in a second. So here on this large format, you've got many frames per page, and huge latitude for the authors to do quite expansive vistas, and it's almost information overload, but as a child it's perfectly easy to take in this amount of information. The quality of some of the drawings is terrific. How on earth they produce these every week to this standard of drawing is beyond me. I think the artists are amazing. The stories, well, my values nowadays are very different to what my values would have been then. But I would have found these stories exciting. Obviously, they're setting out to celebrate valour and courage, particularly of men. Nowadays, you'd look at it probably and say it's glorifying war, and some people would call it jingoism. So here on the cover, disaster day for the Gestapo, and then underneath, see true life war story inside. To what extent they follow the true life war story, who knows? But obviously this was published only about 30 years after the Second World War ended, and a lot of attitudes were still mentally in that space, but obviously over time romanticised and simplified. I'm going to contrast this in a second with the other booklet, but another illustration of what I'm saying. These would be quite short stories, or stories that went on for weeks, but that one's 3 pages, but almost an information overload. But as I say, as a child I love that. Now here's the big difference with Commando. Each of these, and there were a few per month, would be a single story. So let's pick up this one at random, and not unusually this one has 68 pages if you include the covers. 68 pages, but obviously in terms of drawings, 2 or 3 per page. So 2 or 3 per page, but obviously over 64 pages, 68, with the whole thing being a single story. They can do a lot. Again, this very similar style and very high standard of drawings, which is fascinating, and narrative in these square boxes and dialogue in the round speech bubbles, and lots of stereotypical things. So I've just opened this one at random, and the German says "Gott in Himmel." That's probably terrible pronunciation, but I'm not sure it really matters with the dialogue being so stereotyped. So that's where they were at in 73. I picked one up at random, and from the first year I had 71. And when I picked it up at random, I didn't display here because it's just about the least, just about the least typical one I can imagine. You can see the heading there, "Soldier from Space. He came seeking a ready-made army." And that basically is the plot. This man from space arrives in a war zone, and he needs an army because in the future they've forgotten how to fight. And as a result, and he needs an army, he goes back in time to collect one who can teach them in the future. Again, what can you say about some of the dialogue? Obviously, some of it is much improved, and a range of storytelling, some of it much better. But here's a German saying, "Die, England, aye." And the Englishman says, "Not so fast, Fritz." So, yes, quite. I'll leave that to imagine. But when it comes to the science fiction element of it, it then departs from the very realistic war pictures to the artist's kind of difficulty of imagining what to do with science fiction, and it looks more like something like Buck Rogers' programs from cinema shorts from the 1930s. In one sense, the contrast is quite effective, but in another sense, well, what to make? It's just not what you expect in this series of celebrating valour and courage in war. But they had a lot of issues to produce, so maybe for all I know there were more issues that varied like that. So anyway, I don't know if you ever read these as a child, but they're fascinating, and I'll leave those images with you. Thank you.